dramatic turn of events that underscores the escalating transatlantic trade tensions. Recent reports from a high-stakes meeting in Brussels have added fuel to an already blazing debate. On April 1st, 2025, European and American trade officials met in a last-ditch effort to avert a full-blown economic standoff. But instead, the talks only highlighted the deep-seated grievances on both sides. According to sources close to the negotiations, EU representatives walked away from the summit dismayed by what they called uncompromising rhetoric and an apparent disregard for established trade protocols. This contentious atmosphere set the stage for U.S. President Donald Trump's subsequent announcement that has sent shockwaves across the global economic community: the imposition of a 20% tariff on the European Union. U.S. President Donald Trump has taken a bold step by imposing a 20% tariff on the European Union, a move that marks one of the highest trade barriers reinstated since the Great Depression. In a dramatic announcement from the White House Rose Garden, Trump declared a national emergency that enabled him to levy an initial 10% tariff on imports from all nations, followed by additional tariffs on roughly 60 countries he deems the worst trade offenders. Among these, the EU has been singled out for what Trump calls decades of looting, pillaging, rape, and plunder against American industry and workers. Standing before a sea of cameras, Trump spared no words as he denounced the EU. For decades, our country has been looted, pillaged, raped, and plundered by nations near and far, both friend and foe alike, he proclaimed. Now we're going to charge the European Union. They're very tough, very, very tough traders. You know, you think of the European Union as very friendly, but they rip us off. It's so sad to see. It's so pathetic. We're going to charge them 20%. In Trump's eyes, this drastic measure is not merely a trade skirmish. It is a long overdue reckoning with a system that has, for too long, enriched European elites at the expense of American prosperity. This tariff is not an isolated act, but a deliberate disruption aimed at resetting a global trading system that has, in practice, become a rigged game. Trump argues that Europe's trade practices have consistently been characterized by imbalanced tariffs, unfair subsidies, and hidden protectionist barriers. These policies, he claims, have led to a distorted economic relationship where the EU exploits American resources and labor while shielding its own industries through bureaucratic maneuvering in Brussels. The tariffs, then, represent a necessary response to decades of what he describes as economic exploitation and manipulation. Critics in Europe, however, are quick to condemn the tariffs. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen was among the most vociferous in her criticism. In a pointed rebuke, von der Leyen warned that Trump's decision would have dire consequences for the global economy. Groceries, transport, and medicines will cost more, she cautioned, adding that the most vulnerable citizens would bear the brunt of these increased costs. Her comments, though, seem to mask a deeper issue: an EU leadership that has long benefited from a system designed to favor European economic interests at the expense of American workers and global fairness. Von der Leyen's reaction, characterized by her calls for negotiation and her readiness to respond with countermeasures, reveals an EU in denial about its own role in creating an imbalanced global trade system. While she laments the rising costs of basic necessities, she conveniently overlooks how European political and business elites have profited enormously from the very policies that now appear to be unsustainable. According to Trump, the so-called free trade practiced by the EU has always been less about fairness and more about securing free rides for Europe, while leaving the United States to shoulder the negative fallout. Let's examine the broader picture. For decades, American workers and businesses have been disadvantaged by trade policies that have skewed benefits in favor of Europe. The historical narrative of mutual prosperity between the US and the EU is, in many ways, a facade. While it is true that trade between the two has generated millions of jobs and reduced prices for consumers across the Atlantic, this prosperity comes at a significant cost. Behind the scenes, American industries have been undermined by wage suppression, hollowed-out jobs, and an over-reliance on global supply chains that shift the burden of unfair labor practices onto poorer nations. The result is an economic system that, though seemingly beneficial on the surface, has long enriched a select few while leaving ordinary citizens to contend with its consequences. Trump's tariff imposition is, therefore, not just a punitive measure. It is a call to arms for a radical overhaul of global trade practices. His argument is clear. The time for half-hearted negotiations and outdated diplomatic niceties is over. Instead, what is needed is a comprehensive reform that addresses the inherent inequities of the current system. This reform must dismantle the protectionist measures that have allowed the EU to extract wealth from the US while insulating its own industries from fair competition. The narrative put forth by the EU leadership, particularly by von der Leyen, is one of convenient hypocrisy. On one hand, she acknowledges that the global trading system is riddled with deficiencies and is in need of urgent reform. On the other hand, she vehemently opposes the very tariffs that might compel a rebalancing of the system, a system that has, according to Trump, long operated under a cloak of superiority and exploitation. Von der Leyen's insistence on negotiating without addressing the root causes of trade imbalances is seen by Trump as nothing more than an empty gesture, an attempt to maintain the status quo and preserve the privileges that European elites have long enjoyed. Moreover, the insistence that negotiation alone can remedy decades of skewed trade practices is, in Trump's view, a naive approach. The EU, having repeatedly opted to exploit trade loopholes rather than engage in genuine reform, now finds itself on the defensive. The imposition of tariffs is a disruptive force intended to break this cycle of exploitation, urging Europe to finally confront the systemic issues that have defined its trade policies for far too long. In this context, Trump's actions signal a paradigm shift in international trade relations. His decision to impose a 20% tariff on the EU and additional tariffs on nearly 60 other nations represents a decisive move away from a trading system that has long been manipulated by a select few for their own benefit. It is a clarion call for fairness and accountability, challenging an economic order that has prioritized the interests of the powerful over the well-being of ordinary citizens on both sides of the Atlantic. Yet, while the rhetoric is fierce and the stakes are high, the debate over the future of global trade is far from settled. The historical relationship between the United States and the European Union, marked by decades of economic interdependence, has delivered both benefits and burdens. Millions of jobs have been created and consumers have enjoyed lower prices thanks to transatlantic trade. However, beneath this veneer of prosperity lies a reality where the costs of economic imbalance, job hollowing, wage suppression, and unsustainable debt are increasingly coming to the fore. Ultimately, Trump's tariffs are less about exacting punishment and more about forcing a reckoning with a global trading system that is, in his words, broken. They are a direct challenge to an economic order that has allowed the EU to reap the rewards of a system steeped in protectionism and unfair practices. As Europe's leadership scrambles to defend its policies with calls for negotiation and countermeasures, the world watches closely to see whether this disruptive move will finally catalyze the long-overdue reforms necessary for a more balanced global economy. The unfolding scenario is a dramatic illustration of the shifting dynamics of international trade. It exposes the deep-seated flaws in a system that for decades has favored European interests over those of the United States and other trading partners. With Trump's tariffs, what was once seen as a mutually beneficial relationship is now being re-examined under the harsh light of economic reality. The old order, characterized by unchecked privileges and an unbalanced distribution of wealth, is being forcefully challenged, a challenge that may very well redefine the future of global trade. In the end, the clash between Trump's aggressive tariff strategy and the EU's traditional insistence on negotiation underscores a fundamental debate about fairness and economic justice in a globalized world. As both sides stand firm in their positions, one thing is clear: the status quo can no longer be sustained. It is time for true reform, one that not only levels the playing field, but also ensures that the benefits of international trade are shared equitably, rather than being monopolized by a select few. The coming months will reveal whether this confrontation leads to lasting change or merely deepens the economic divisions that have long plagued the transatlantic partnership.